This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Welcome to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast, helping take your leadership to the next level. My name is Sam, and I am your host, and joining me today is Dr. Richard Blackaby.
As always, great to be with you, Sam.
Back from the Great White North.
Yep. Even after missed connection and two planes with mechanical problems, both planes. That hasn't happened that much with me on Delta Airlines, but it was a perfect storm trying to get home from Canada this week.
Well, we're glad to have you back, and it sounds like you had a good trip at your old stomping grounds up there.
You know, I left the presidency of that school 16 years ago, and it's kind of special to get asked to come back 16 years later and still teach and minister there.
Yeah, they said, enough time has passed, so we thought we might bring Richard back. No, but you teach a leadership seminar up there with your
every other year,
cousin Rob. So
you in the classroom, you look straight out on the Rocky Mountains out the window.
Tough to beat that view.
You got to be teaching at your best there to keep people's attention without distraction.
Exactly. Well, something that is I think a lot of people find tough is speaking in front of people, and that's going to be something we're going to look at today. And I think. It's maybe something that's not on the front of mind for a lot of leaders. Public speaking, when they think about leading, it's about people, it's about connecting and inspiring and that sort of thing. And oftentimes I think actual public speaking gets overlooked. And we've talked about the importance of communication before on this podcast in regards to leadership, and I'll refer you back to that episode. Mm-hmm. But I think public speaking is a real specific form of leadership communication. And I just think, there's a lot of remote teams now, thanks to COVID, that sort of hurried along the work from home aspect of things. And there's Slack channels and email and Zoom meetings and everything else. So there's a lot of different ways to communicate. And I think maybe just to start off is honing your public speaking prowess even necessary if you're going to be a leader in today's world? Yeah,
and you're right. You can use technology and all kinds of different media to communicate with people, and those are all good. But I do feel like as a leader, there are just those public moments where you get in front of people and you need to communicate and inspire and bless. The leader just has to get on the stage now and then. And it might be that just you're going to speak to around a boardroom table to 3 direct reports. Or maybe you're tasked to give announcements in your church every Sunday, and you're going to get up in front of people. And I'll tell you what, that could be a painful experience if someone is not doing that well.
Both for the giver and the receiver.
And they're just different degrees of stage presence. But I don't think that should be a lost art yet. I think there's still those moments where face to face, you've got to communicate in a way that gets your message across and moves people onto God's agenda, if you will.
Well, and I thought since you do so much of that professionally, I thought this would be a good, just sort of a good experience for our listeners to kind of learn from someone who that's your job, aside from other things, but public speaking is something you do, and you make it look effortless.
Well, thanks. Well, let me just give a couple of these are off the cuff, but some things I've learned along the way, just some of the things, it take a while to really dredge up all the different things I've learned, from a lot of it from failure and experience, but let me just rapid fire maybe some of these. One is just begin with your message. Sometimes people get so uptight about the delivery that they forget that the key is the message. If you have nothing worth saying, it doesn't matter how well you say it. And I have been around people that it was all about the style, the delivery. But when you actually listen to what they were saying, they had no content. They delivered it well. It was interesting. It was loud. It was animated. There just wasn't much there.
Yeah.
So, always start with a message. And if you don't have something to say, then maybe take a pass that, but work on the message. That's really where the power comes from. If you have something important to say, then it's worth trying to find the best way to deliver the message. But always start with a message. And if you do have a good message, if there's, it could be that we've got to pull up our socks and go to another level, or we've got to face this threat that's coming up against our organization, or here's a possibility we don't want to miss, whatever that might be. If you have a message that you really truly feel is important, then a second thing is just be confident in delivering it. People need they need to hear the truth, and if you've got a truth message to share with people, whether you're preaching a sermon, whether you're giving, inspiring the troops in your organization, whatever that might be, then speak confidently. And I know people that they know the facts, they know the truth, they know the importance, but then they get up and they think more about themselves than about the message. Yeah. And they think, well, I'm not a very good speaker. I'm not good at communicating. And
they get self-conscious.
Yeah, and it's like, but you have a really important message. So think more about the message than about you as the deliverer of the message. It's not about you. It's these people need to hear this truth. And if it's a really good truth, and that's something I had to learn. I found that if I had prepared, if I had sought God's guidance, if I had studied, and I looked at my notes and I thought, there's some life-changing truths here. When I saw God use those truths to change lives, I saw I'd have an altar call maybe in a church service, and the altar would be filled in response to those truths. I began to realize that's not because I just delivered it well. That's because these are powerful truths. And so that gave me confidence. If I know my material, I'm prepared, I can get up and deliver that with confidence, knowing not that, boy, they're going to really like me today, but boy, when they come face to face with this truth, they're going to be blown away by what God said, or the fact that this truth can set them free.
Well, something I've heard you say before, I think, is just maybe a pet peeve of maybe when people don't speak very often and they get up there and they sort of share honestly how they're feeling about having to do this talk, and then it sort of can derail whatever it is they're going to say after that. Like, I'm not, I don't do this often, or I'm not a great public speaker, but here's what I have to say.
I think what I'll do is I'm going to give you a quick list here at the end of just the not to do things, and that's one of the big ones is get your focus on the message, not on your inadequacy, not on your nervousness. I would just say a couple other things just in terms of just what to do is one is keep eye contact. I know if you're nervous, you're going to tend to want to look down at your notes. You're going to look at your iPad or whatever it is. But there's power when you look at people, and there could be 1,000 people in the room, but experienced speakers know. Don't just kind of look in general. Don't look in the back of the room. Don't look at the clock on the wall at the back. Look at people, and even out of 1,000 people, highlight someone sitting in the front row, someone sitting in the middle. And typically speakers are going to look for someone who's engaged, like you find someone who's smiling and nodding in agreement and taking notes and amening, whatever. But that really can get a speaker going. And so don't look at someone who keeps looking at their watch and, obviously is agitated or wanting to leave. But hone in on a couple of, there's always some. And by the way, that also taught me to be a good audience person. If I'm the one in the audience, as a speaker, I know how encouraging that is when someone is with me and nodding and obviously enjoying what I'm saying. So, get eye contact, look at specific people. People can kind of tell in the audience, even if you're in a huge room, if they're kind of just looking around but not really looking at anyone, but look straight at people. And sometimes I find in a smaller setting, especially, let's say like you're speaking at a podium or a pulpit or something, there are moments where if you will draw near, like I'll literally come out from behind the podium and just take a step toward people. And there could be 1,000 people in the room, but you take 1 or 2 steps forward and that immediately draws people. They can tell you're getting closer. And I've done that. And especially smaller settings, sometimes they'll put the lectern back 20 feet from the first row of people, and you're way back there. And I just find get out from behind the lectern and just physically move closer to people, right up to the front row sometimes, and everybody, you can't not pay attention, and heads come up, people are looking at you. It's a way of sort of getting people's attention and drawing them closer to you. I would say be engaged yourself. So if you don't seem to care about what you're talking about, then there's no way you're going to get other people to care as well. I'm thinking this person's just trying to drone through the announcements or just drone through this presentation. They're just trying to make sure they don't miss one of the points in their outline, but they don't seem to care. They're not passionate. And I would just say be immersed enough in the message that you really care about what you're saying, and it's obvious. And if you really seem to care, then that usually gives you people will at least give you the benefit of the doubt to say, wow, if this guy cares this much about what he's saying, I need to at least listen and see if it is as important as it seems to be. And, be passionate. One thing you can do is you can take a video, have someone just record your presentation. And what you're going to probably discover is you thought you were passionate. You thought you came across that way. But then when you see the recording, you think, my word, I almost put myself to sleep there.
Yeah, that can be painful, watching yourself.
There's few things as painful as that. And so, watch, that doesn't mean you have to shout the whole way through. But be engaged, smile, be passionate, put energy to talk. I'm usually exhausted after I give a presentation because you have to be engaged in it, and that always takes energy from me. If I don't feel depleted, then I may not have been engaged enough. I didn't put enough into it. I'd say also just be prepared. And of course that goes without saying, do your homework, know what you're saying. I'll tell you what, if you keep getting lost in your own presentation because you didn't prepare well enough and think through what you were going to say. One thing I found sometimes if I've got a real important sermon or something or I'm going to deliver, and especially if I've got a limited time, maybe it's, I speak lots of times where there's a countdown clock sitting in front of me, and I know I've got 25 minutes or 35 minutes, and I'm seeing the clock ticking down, and sometimes the clock the screen will turn yellow when I'm 5 minutes away, and then it's flashing, another color when it's 1 minute away, and now it's red and it's flashing red, and smoke's coming out, and they have a whole series of things. And so what I find that's really helpful for me is if I will, if maybe I'm in my hotel room or something. And typically I'll just kind of think through my notes and, think through the outline, the points. But when I'm getting near the time to present it, sometimes I'll just out loud talk it through in my room. And when you do that, oftentimes you'll discover, especially with public speaking, oftentimes it's the transitions that get you. Mm-hmm. You look at each point and you realize, okay, yeah, that's an important point. That's an important point. But you haven't really thought through, how am I going to connect point one to point two? How do I go from the introduction to point one? Mm-hmm. How do I wrap this up in the conclusion? But when you talk it out, then you can sort of think, okay, I could highlight, I could say this, and that leads straight into this conclusion or the next point. And so talk it out. And then you can always be more concise than you are. And rambling on, repeating yourself, saying things, 3 different ways, but saying the same thing. I know that there's a pedagogical sort of feeling that, you tell them what you said, then tell them again, then tell them what you said. And I just don't like that. I think tell them powerfully the first time, and so that you make it memorable, and move on and tell them something else that's memorable. But when you keep repeating yourself, people are thinking, he took 30 minutes to give me a 10-minute talk. If he just said things concisely, and that takes preparation. And anyone who's been a public speaker knows that it's harder to give a 5-minute talk than to give a 60-minute talk. You tell me to take 60 minutes and talk about some topic that I know about, I can ramble on for 60 minutes and still run out of time. You tell me you've got 5 minutes to make a memorable, significant point, and I'm going to have to work and agonize over, do I have time to use this illustration or to make this point, or how could I say this more concisely? But I think that's a great exercise. Just learn to be concise with what you're saying. Think about what you want to say. And along with that, anytime you're making a talk, whether it's for 2 minutes or for an hour, know what your main point is. So you might be talking for an hour, but what is, in one sentence, what is the one thing you want people to come away knowing? And I would go even a step further to say, if you're talking for however long, what is it you want people to go away and do as a result of what you said? We tend to sometimes think, well, I just want them to know this, but typically you want more than that. It's like if you're preaching a sermon, you don't want people just to have more knowledge in their head. You want them to live differently. You want them to act differently. So start there. Say, I would love, after I've given this 30-minute talk, I would love if all my team went out from this talk and they began acting this way. They began doing this. They changed their behavior and started acting this way. And so if you know what the end game is, then you know, okay, now how am I going to need to present this in a way that inspires them, convicts them to start acting differently than they did before?
Would you say that if you're going to give an address, a talk, whether it's to your employees or to a church or what have you, would you say when you're doing that, it's generally going to be to affect them in some way, to make them make a change? And if it's going to be just more informational, that should just be an email or like a written
think
message or
yeah, I think there's way too many speeches where we're just giving information that you could have put that in an email. But to emotionally engage people, to impact them, where they're inspired to change, that often takes a face-to-face. That you can maybe write something that's very compelling as well, but I tend to think, I would challenge pretty well every speaker to say, so in light of the talk you're about to give, what is the result you want? And verbalize that, picture that. And then everything else you put in your talk, ask yourself, by saying this, is it going to lead people to do what I hope that they will do? Mm-hmm. A couple other things just to say on that. Be positive. My dad used to say there's always a negative way of saying something and a positive way. And you may have to address some difficult issues, but there's usually a positive way of approaching it. And I would say two things as well, that make use of humor when you can. Mm-hmm. I mean, sometimes it can even be a pretty serious topic, but humor, you want to touch people's emotions. If you haven't affected their emotions, you're probably not going to change their behavior. Mm-hmm. People need to be engaged emotionally. And there's a lot of studies that seem to suggest that we're really creatures, even though we think we're rational beings, we tend to be driven by our feelings, and then we use our brains to rationalize why we're doing what our feelings told us to do.
Yeah.
And so when you use humor, you touch people's feelings, and that's anyone who's spoken much knows that. For instance, you may really want to get people to make some life changes, but maybe if you start your message off with some humor, it can seem a little light or almost trivializing an important issue. But what you've done is you've activated people's emotions. And if you can get people laughing at the beginning of your talk, to be honest with you, it makes it much easier to have them weeping by the end of your talk.
Well, and I think just as a technical aside, I think you always, or if you are going to use humor, that's something you should lead with.
Right.
Like you should start your talk with humor.
Right.
And that gives you the space to.
If you're gonna, if it's an upbeat message and you want to give hope and encouragement, then maybe you can also send them out laughing as well. But a lot of times, if you really want to get to the heart, you start with emotion or with humor. It gets people engaged. It sort of activates. Humor tends to build trust. They
brings
like
down
you.
guards as well.
Yeah, they like you. They think, oh, this guy's funny. I like him. He's kind of self-depreciating. He's kind of poking fun at himself, and so he obviously doesn't take himself real seriously. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to know what he has to say now. And along with that is also just make use of story. Story still is the universal language. And it's interesting. I was just a week or two ago, I was traveling internationally, and I was talking with someone, and this person began reminding me of stories I had told years ago. I mean, he was in some conferences with me a decade ago, and he's saying, I remember when you told this story. I remember when you said this. And it's interesting. I don't think he remembered one scripture I used, although I did, and one major theological point, but the stories and the message that they represented, he remembered all of those. And so I just find that when you're speaking, a lot of times, if you could say we need to work together as a team, like we all get that, but tell a story where you did work together as a team, or a different organization worked together, and you just remember that. It makes sense. A stories kind of have an emotional weight to them as well, that they speak to your emotions, not just to your mind. And once you get your emotions engaged, there's way more chance that people are going to be open to you and open to a change. And maybe just a couple last things as far as what to do. Be truthful. That kind of goes without saying. But if you and speakers often are tempted to exaggerate. But if it's obvious you're doing that, then they're not going to take anything else. They're going to kind of just blow you off. This guy's he's just
telling tall tales.
Yeah, I don't trust him. And that's why sometimes even that's why I don't like telling kind of canned stories, because they just don't even sound truthful. They may be based on someone else, some story in the past, but it's been so changed and morphed over time that now the story you're telling, anyone who actually knows the story,
it feels like you just pull it off the shelf.
Right.
Like,
And you haven't researched
story.
it. You don't know for sure. You haven't verified it. You pulled something off the internet. But when you tell a story, and it doesn't mean you can't tell someone else's story, like that happened to Winston Churchill or something, but just look it up. Just do your research. Make sure you know the actual dates and so on, and you're not just telling some morphed story that just barely resembles the truth. And I would also just say, expect results. If you're going to speak, then expect that something good's going to happen. And I say this to a lot of preachers that have altar calls, at the close of their sermon. But a lot of times preachers preach in a way that you don't really get the sense that they think that much is going to happen. They speak, but it's so timid and it lacks confidence. I would just say, if you're going to speak to people and you have a good message and you're telling truth that could set them free, then you ought to speak that with confidence, that you expect that after you hear what I have to say, I know you're going to want to respond in some positive way. And if you expect results, it's just amazing how you get them a lot more often.
Well, I knew our time would fly by today, so let's take a quick break here, and we will look at some things not to do when we come back.
Hello, I'm Richard Blackaby. I'm the co-author of Experiencing God. And here at the Blackaby Bible Institute, we're offering an online class of Experiencing God that people can take from around the world. No one had any idea back in 1990, when Experiencing God was first published, that it would be so life-transforming and that people would experience revival. They'd be set free from burdens they'd carried for years. I can't go anywhere in the world without people telling me how this material has changed their life. And so we offer it as the Blackabys, where we have all kinds of video resources, a live stream where you can submit live questions and get answers from myself and others, and just many different resources that will enhance your experience of Experiencing God. So I want to encourage you, if you've never taken the class before, or even if you have, the Blackaby Bible Institute will offer you more resources than you could have gotten anywhere else. And so we look forward to studying with you, and we're praying that it will change your life as you do.
Hi, Richard. Before the break, we looked at some good pointers on what to do if you find yourself in that position of giving a talk, whether that's in the marketplace or at your work or at a church. But I thought we'd end today with some things to avoid.
Yeah.
Because there's always some of those sort of red flags of public speaking, and so maybe walk us through some of the big things that you've seen and witnessed and know that at all costs, don't do these things.
Well, and a lot of times, especially in churches and other places, you see they're not professionals. Maybe they're volunteers, and sometimes it can just be really painful. And I would just say one thing right off the bat that just really annoys me, and that is just people that are so self-conscious that they unknowingly keep drawing more attention to themselves. And so,
and the fact that they're
when they get up and they say, "Well, I'm really nervous right now," or "I don't know why they asked me to do this because I know there's lots of people here who could do a better job," or I didn't have much time to prepare this week. I just want to keep saying, just fast forward all of that. Just all it's going to do is make it weird. It's bad enough that you're unprepared, you're nervous, you're self-conscious. It's bad enough that you're nervous and unprepared and self-conscious, but now you're drawing everyone's attention to that fact. Just cut out all of that. And
people might have missed that.
They're going to know anyway. If you're a bad speaker, you don't need to tell them. They'll find that out shortly. So let them discover that themselves. But it's just amazing to me how many people will do that, and they'll just get up and immediately start pointing out all the shortcomings they have. And I just want to say, get over that. Just cut all that out and realize that if you're speaking, whether it's in church or whether it's in your business, you are the appointed person. God has placed you in that position, whether it's to make announcements in your church or whether it's to give a pep talk to your team. Like you're in that position. So just assume that God has you there for a reason and that God will equip you. And so just get focused as quickly as you can on the content that will actually set people free. Hearing your 10-minute preamble about why you're not very qualified is not going to set anybody free, inspire anybody. But if you get to your message, which hopefully is something that is powerful, that can affect people. So get there, get to the good stuff as quick as you can. And I'd also just say don't and avoid the nervous stuff that people often say. And one thing that just drives me crazy is when people get up and say, "Well, this will be brief. This is not going to take long." Almost invariably, those are the longest talks you ever have to endure. I don't know why it is. A lot of times, what's happening is they didn't really prepare very well, and so they don't think they've got very much to say. And so they'll kind of alert people. They're basically saying, "I didn't prepare very much on this, so I probably won't have much to say." And then they ramble on and on and on because they're not prepared, and it ends up taking 5 times as long as it should have had they prepared. So I almost just know, you can just almost take it to the bank when someone says, "Well, this is going to be brief," that it's not going to be brief. It's going to be long because they didn't prepare. And so I just be careful about impromptu stuff. Like I have said things off the cuff. Sometimes I felt like it was God telling me to do that. But if you get off script, you also get into minefields. And especially with humor, there've been a few times where like you're tempted to throw in some kind of funny comment. Sometimes it works. Sometimes you think, oh, that didn't go where I thought it was going to go. And so think it through carefully. I never speak from a manuscript, so I'm always having to pull some things together. But be careful when you kind of go off script, because that's when you haven't thought that through. You haven't thought about the ramifications, or think about the audience. Is this going to work for them? Maybe I better just stick to the script, and also when you add stuff, oftentimes your talk goes longer than you intended, and before long you're out of time. And the last thing I would just say with that is just be careful that you don't go too long. I've known, I was just a few months ago was speaking at a big event, and there were several speakers, and we were all given a time, and we were told in no uncertain terms, we got a full schedule. If you go off 10, 15 minutes long, you throw everybody off, and it ends up being a late night. So I think it's just one of the rudest things I can think of is when there's 3 or 4 speakers and one of them takes 15, 20 extra minutes just because, and really most of the time it's because they just didn't do the work to prepare ahead of time and figure out, I've got 20 minutes. How much can I pack in succinctly in 20 minutes? It's just the rudest thing in the world. If you just want to not get invited back as a speaker, just abuse that and go longer. And sometimes preachers will blame it on the Holy Spirit. Well, I just felt led to ramble on for 20 more minutes than necessary. No, the Spirit of God, if you'd gone to the Spirit of God beforehand in your preparation, he could have given you a 20-minute presentation. And I was with this one place, and I hadn't seen it quite like this before, but when clearly the guy had gone overtime and they started playing background music. At first it's kind of quiet. It's almost like, oh, that's kind of nice. They're just wrapping up. And then the music got louder and louder until the guy is almost having to shout over the music. And they're trying to say, look, your time's up. You blew it. You told all these cute little stories earlier on, and then you ran out of time to get to the meat. So that just one thing is start on time, end on time. And if they give you 20 minutes, I mean, I have gone overtime sometimes, and sometimes you miscalculated and you can't quite cut the story off halfway in the middle. You got to find a way to land the plane as quick as you can, but be sensitive to the fact that the people are there, and you may have other speakers after you, so don't throw them all late so that the last speaker is starting when he should already be closing.
Yeah, those are all really great points. And I thought maybe just before we end, you mentioned that you don't ever use a manuscript when you speak, and maybe you could just sort of give us a flyby of what does it look like when Richard Blackaby sits down to prepare for a talk, whether it's I'm sure there's going to be some difference depending on the occasion and the length and all that, but what does that maybe just sort of the skeleton of what does a preparation look like? Yeah,
well, first of all, know what the theme is. If you're in a conference, sometimes if you're in a conference, they'll have a whole theme for everybody, and be true to that. Now, I know some speakers, they've got their sort of sugar stick kind of talks they give all the time, and it doesn't matter what the theme is. They're going to find some way to just insert the same talk they've given for years.
Yeah. And
you can just tell when or sometimes they'll spiritualize it, which really is rough. Well, I know that the theme is on, evangelism, but I just felt the Lord leading me to talk about, mothers or something. It's like a totally different theme. And that's just, you didn't want to put the work in. And so I always try to know what the theme is. And then I'll try to think, well, what can I contribute? What can I say that will undergird that theme? And then one of my first thoughts is, well, what scripture, if I can, use the Bible, if it's a sermon or something, or a spiritual talk, I always want to say, what would be a verse or a passage that would just really bring this to light? And where does God's word say about that? And so try to come up with that. And then what I found, I guess, the more you speak, the more you have to say. And so I want to brainstorm. Well, what are all the things that could be said here? But then look at the time. I've only got 30 minutes. I can't have a 5-point sermon in 30 minutes. So how many points can I make in that time? And I love telling stories. I'd like to at least have one or two to kind of just nail that down. And some stories they take time. If you're going to tell a good story, it's going to take a few minutes. And sometimes I'll think, well, this is a really hilarious story, but it's just going to eat up too much time. I've only got 25 minutes. And so you try to piece it together to say, what would be a memorable, what's a key scripture? What's a key point that probably maybe these people haven't heard before? I don't want to just kind of say the same stuff everybody knows. And I need to really think hard on this myself, and then think, what's the contribution? And I love it when people come up, if like I'm speaking to pastors, and a pastor comes up and says, I preached on this passage for years, but I've never seen that, or I've never thought of that. And that always does my heart a little good. Not like it's just, why aren't I good? But it's like, okay, even other public speakers learned something tonight. They saw something they hadn't seen before. And so I try to do that, and then just think through how to wrap it up. Probably the two hardest things with sermons, or just any talk, is your introduction and your conclusion. Yeah. I think most people have something they can say, but how do you grip people right off the bat? How do you get their attention and get them sitting up and leaning in to hear what you have to say? And often that's starting with a story or humor. And then last thing is just land the plane. Yeah. I know guys, they've made some good points.
There's some guys still circling the runway.
They're still circling, and they're like, I can't quite figure out how to just wrap this up. And so I usually spend a lot of time thinking, how do I introduce this? How do I put this to bed? And how do I do it in a way that just, and if I really, being careful with that, write down to what's the last sentence I want to say that just sums it all up, just takes it home, and I just walk away from the podium after that. And what's that final, statement that will just wrap it up, and everyone just like, wow, that was great.
Well, to that end, I think you've got a couple of books here. We'll just leave with folks, and I'll leave links to those in the show notes. But for, if you find yourself leading and needing to do some public speaking on whatever scale, I think some of these may help you do that.
Yeah, and there's some books that I've got a number of books just on preaching for pastors. I didn't pull those out, but there's a number of those that are great. And I do think if you're a pastor, you should be reading through a preaching book every couple of years, just to have some fresh ideas. But just some other books, kind of more business type books. One is called Leading Out Loud by Terry Pearce. The subtitle, Inspiring Change Through Authentic Communication. And when I reference books, it doesn't mean I agree with everything they say. Sure. I'm not saying that these are even the best books out there. These are just some of the ones that I just grabbed off my shelf. Interestingly, I've got Leading Out Loud. There's another book by Joseph Badaracco called Leading Quietly, which is sort of the opposite of you're not on the stage. I kind of have those together, like leading out loud or quietly. And then a book I think I may have mentioned, we may have done a podcast on, was the TED Talks book by Chris Anderson. And of course, TED Talks are a very unique thing. You're not going to typically do that in a sermon, but they're only about 22 minutes long, and so you can say a lot in 22 minutes, as they prove, but they're typically not going to be necessary to give you lots of information. They're going to more make you think. They're going to raise thoughts and
yeah. Well, they have a formula for
it's
TED
pretty
Talk.
Formulaic in some ways, but I think some of the principles are good. You may speak longer, but they've made it a science to get up in front of people, and in 22 minutes, how much can you communicate if you've really thought it through and you're maximizing every moment on the stage. And so that I think it's helpful. I found it interesting. I mean, most of the stuff they were promoting, I'd kind of learned just from experience. I've just learned that that's how that is. I don't always practice it always, but so I would just say, and there's other books. There's lots of great books on communication, but we can put those in the links. But I would just say, if you are in any kind of role where you've got to get in front of people and communicate personally, you can always improve, and you can always get into bad habits. And so you might be really good, you might be very experienced. It never hurts to circle back around and say, but I think lately I've been going a little long. I think I've been I could start out with more energy. I think I've kind of sort of stumbled to the finish line, and I should spend a little more time just wrapping it up into a nice neat bow at the end. And there's always something you can improve on, but there is power in that, in good communication, and I think it's worth the effort to keep getting better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for taking the time, and until next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.